If you're writing the CIA into your story, you want to make sure you're getting your facts correct so that you don't get called out in your reviews, which is why it's so important to talk to consultants like today's expert, Bill Rapp. Bill is a long-time CIA analyst, and he's breaking down everything we need to know to lend authenticity to our stories. And bonus points, Bill happens to be a published author himself, so he knows exactly what we need to make sure that we are writing authentically inside of our stories. Let's jump into today's conversation because this man is a wealth of information over many, many years with lots of connections to the CIA that you do not want to miss out on.
Hi, good morning or good afternoon, I guess, depending on what coast you're on. My name is Bill Rapp. I am a retired CIA officer who is an analyst primarily by training and practice. Although I had a very broad set of experiences working for the agency over 41 years. It's now going on 41 years. I retired from my full-time job there in 2017. I continue to work as an advisor, consultant, and foreign trainer as well for the agency. Not sure when all that's going to end because it's, as you might imagine, it's a place and the kind of work that's very hard to break away from, and certainly not cold turkey. I was not able to do that. However, it was a very rewarding career, a very rewarding life that I've had there. And I don't feel any pressing need to break away and just drop it all at once. It's where I met my wife. We raised a family of two daughters, numerous miniature schnauzers, and had wonderful experiences overseas, although we've spent the bulk of my career, and our career, I should say, living in the Washington, D.C. area and working directly with the policymakers downtown, as we refer to it at the agency, downtown, the people downtown. So I think I would just start by saying that I really began my professional life as an academic historian. And that's when I started out, that was going to be my future. I got my undergraduate degree at Notre Dame, a master's at the University of Toronto up in Canada, and my PhD at Vanderbilt in Nashville, Tennessee. And I started teaching. I was an associate professor, a visiting professor for a year at Iowa State University. I had signed a contract to teach European history at the University of Arkansas, Little Rock. And but along the way, I kind of wondered if the academic life was really for me. I thought it might be a little too sedentary. And so I had started an application process with the State Department and with the agency. I passed the exams for the State Department, was put on what they call their list in a political cone. But the agency was the first to call, and I think attracted by the fact that I had studied and lived overseas in Austria and Germany and had the German language capability since in 1981, Germany was the front line, the big prize in the Cold War. And so they were the ones that reached out to me. I hemmed and hawed, and I broke my contract with the University of Arkansas and went to Washington. And I tell people I never look back. And when I do look back at the end of this career, I tell them that there would not be a moment's hesitation on my part. I would do it all over again in a heartbeat. And that's, I think, because of the mission, because of the work. It spoke directly to my experience as a historian. There was a very easy segue from that into working as an analyst at the CIA, and also the people. I was really surprised at the quality of the people and the intellectual level of the work there. It's found that always very rewarding. So I say as I was an analyst, I like to say I was a diplomat because I did 2 tours overseas where I was seconded to the State Department. One of those was in Berlin as the wall fell and Germany reunified. I keep trying to take credit for that, but people are a little too smart to take that at face value. And also another one in London near the end of my career, which was, we spent 3 to 4 years living in London. So, not much more, you don't need to say much more about that. And then we did a tour in Ottawa where I was worked in liaison with the Canadian services. And that was a wonderful family tour. We love that city. It's where our younger daughter started playing hockey, ice hockey. She was about 6, 7 when we moved up there. So when they started training them formally to play hockey, and she fell in love with the sport and never looked back. They played it right up through college. Our other daughter works at the agency and is works in the Langley, what they call the Langley Children's Center, which is the agency's daycare center. And I often go in there and read. I just got a request from the kids if Mr. Bill wants to come find tadpoles with them one day this week. So I'll probably do that. And then, of course, my wife, she retired just last July. And had a very successful career, very successful career. She ended up as in her last full-time job, she was the director's chief of staff. And so, and got numerous awards for her work there. So it's been a family affair, but as I said before, a very rewarding one. And I've worked at translating some of that experience into my espionage fiction as well. So I think it's enough about me and my career.
And I think that's fantastic because you are a writer, so you can give us a lot of insight into how the entertainment industry should be portraying the CIA inside of their stories and their movies and their TV shows. So
Mhm.
let's actually have this conversation because I know during your time in the CIA, you've had a number of different jobs. You mentioned that you were a diplomat and that you have worked with the White House and that you've done all these different things. And so we're going to break that down
Mhm.
in today's conversation. But before we get into the day to day life, I want to know a little bit about the job specifications and qualifications. So, if we have a character who is going to be joining the CIA, what are some of those things that they have to do to meet those qualifications to be a part of that?
Well, one of the things we look for, of course, we look at the academic record and the career. There's depending on the type of work. Now, obviously, that's more important if you're going to be an analyst. If you're going to be a case officer, you're really looking at personality profile. Say somebody said that the best case officers are the ones that are a cross between a used car salesman and a priest. And because you do need to have that outgoing and engaging personality, but you also have to have a commitment and to the work you do and to the people you recruit and work with. So I think that's a pretty fair assessment. The uh, other thing I think is language. That's incredibly important, and it what's interesting over the years is how that the shift in the languages you're most interested in, or we are most interested in, would shift. Obviously, during the Cold War, the European languages and German was very important. When we became very involved in Central America, Spanish was incredibly important. And then, of course, Russia was always important and is once again very important as well. And but then Arabic and Chinese as well. For the long time, we were just really focused on bringing in Arabic and Chinese speakers. So the language is important, but also if you're going to be doing field assignments, they look for people that have experience living overseas. How do you cope? How do you adjust? Are you flexible? Are you going to get homesick right away and want to come home the minute you get off the airplane? Um, Obviously, that's not good, and it's not good for you because then you have to reimburse the government if you don't stay very long. So, all the moving costs and the flight costs, there's a time limit there. So those are things that they really look for, but it's a very involved hiring process. And then, of course, there's it takes a lot of time, and of course, there's the security background check. And ironically, people who have lived overseas, of course, have a lot of overseas contacts, so that makes for a more extensive background check. But uh, you just have to have patience and you wait it out. I remember I did when I was sitting at home at our house in Nashville, waiting to see if I should break the contract with Arkansas Little Rock or come to the agency. I was just waiting on that security clearance, and I finally thought, well, I'd really rather be going to Washington to work for the agency. So I thought I should let the University of Arkansas know before it's too late that I'm not going to be coming. So I took a chance. I hadn't gotten the security clearance yet, but so I called Arkansas, let them know I wasn't coming, and uh, several weeks later, the security clearance came through. So I just started packing my bags and piled everything into my old Mustang and drove to Washington D.C.
That's
So I think that's what it is. It really comes down to your academic background or your personality, which is best attuned to the career path you choose, and your language and your particularly background in a particular culture. Since I was going to be a German analyst, they obviously were intrigued by the fact that I had studied all that German history and lived in Germany and knew the German culture and politics so well. Um, but in terms of one of the things we used to joke about, the operations officers always thought of the analysts as sort of geeks, as to be expected. And they would say the extroverted analyst is the one who looks at somebody else's shoes rather than his own shoes when he's talking to you. So it's you know one of the little inside jokes.
I love that. That's fantastic. Okay. So, with that in mind, as an analyst, what did a typical day look like, or what might a typical day look like if we were writing that into a story?
Well, the typical day was you would come in the morning. Well, when I started, it was before computers. So you would wait and you would get all the paper traffic would come piled on, somebody would dump it on the desks and you'd start to divide it up and read through it. And eventually, you read through all of it to decide if there's anything pressing that you needed to write that day, because we have daily publications that go around. Back in the day when I started, it was the National Intelligence Daily, which circulated amongst the intelligence and policy making community, to the people with the clearances. Or and that would set you off on a whole path of writing something for the National Intelligence Daily or the President's Daily Brief. Or you might be working on an article that you didn't necessarily need to go into the daily publications that same day. You had a little leeway. If you were writing something about an upcoming election in a country, you had some more time to put your piece together. But often it's, particularly for the President's Daily Brief, even though those are planned out, weeks in advance, there's always a crisis that erupts or something that has to happen. So then you have to get down and you start drafting what you have to write. You have to coordinate it with the various offices who might have a investment in the topic or the issue. And then it moves up through the review process, and that can take all day into the evening. And then you have to see what they do with the editorial staff for those particular publications. And you could end up, if you're writing a PDB, you're usually there till about 9 or 10 at night. And it's just the business, you just accept that. But at the same time, you also are usually working on a longer paper. It could be like a 10 to 20 page assessment. But that's actually, that's a longer term, more strategic subject. And you work on that as you have time, unless there's a request, because you often gets requests from policymakers downtown and say, look, could you guys look into this? We'd like you to look into that. One of the times when I was working on the Eastern Mediterranean, we got a call from the National Security Council and said, we kind of like you guys. We want to reassess our policy on this one country. So we want you guys to write the paper that we'll use as the basis for our discussion. But we only had a couple of days to do that. So we had to quick figure out, okay, so what do we want to say to these folks? What do we put in this paper? And then you rush it through the process. It was a big success. We did that. Another time, somebody from the National Security Council came by and he says, the Austrian president is visiting. This was during the Reagan administration. And he says, so we want you to give a paper that really talks about the Austrian mind, the Austrian state of mind and their political culture and their viewpoint perspectives on things, so that the president is better prepared when he has a discussion with the Austrian president. And so I thought, oh, this is great. All this history, all this literature that I spent all this time reading in school. And of course, by the time it got to the front office, people were paring all that stuff out. And I said, but they want that in there. And they said, well, send it down like this. So we took it down to that particular desk officer at the NSC. And he says, well, we need to put more of that history and literature back in. So let's sit down and do it right here, which was great. because it was, and those sorts of things were just incredibly rewarding. You're seeing the impact of what you do right there, and it's immediate. And that was always a very gratifying aspect of the work, because you did have a direct pipeline into policy. And you didn't make policy, of course, it's not our remit, but you were informing it, and in the hopes that it would be better policy because people were better informed. Didn't always work out that way, but at least you could say you did your best. And when it did work out that way, it was incredibly rewarding. So that's sort of the life of the analyst. And you would also do oral briefings around town, or debriefings. I remember the chairman of the Joint Chiefs would call us when he went to a particular part of the world that he liked our analysis. And so he'd call us to come down, invite us to come down and talk to him about his discussions and to help give us some additional background data material, So you would do that as well. And that could happen with any of the departments downtown. And so that's sort of the life of the analyst. But at the same time, you also worked with your colleagues at in what we call collection, the operations officers, because you relied on their material as well. You rely on the State Department reporting. So you always try to have a good working relationship with people at the State Department in your area. I was fortunate that was usually the case. And also the NSA, in case you're getting intelligence, what we call signals intelligence, intercepts. You want to work with them, and they'll want to ask you, what are the topics that you're interested in? What should we be trying to collect? because as you might imagine, they get just a wealth of material and they have to perform some triage just to get through it all. And so they ask for your assistance in doing that. So there is that work with the collectors. It's an important part of the work as an analyst. So you just spend your day just talking to people and reading material, taking notes, building files, working on papers or projects that you've got going. When you move into management, which I did eventually, you're managing people and showing them how to do all this, and you're working with them and you're training. And we used to say, give them the tools they need to succeed. And so there's a lot of training in our building. And so that was an important element of your work as a manager, but also making sure that they were focused on the right issues, that their writing skills and analytic skills were being honed so that they could succeed and move up the ladder of what we call the GS ladder, the pay scale ladder. And then you also, at the higher you were in management, the more outreach you did downtown to make sure that your folks were working on the right projects and to see if there were any issues with the material you were producing. So it's, and then you would sit, when I sat on the corporate board, we would, be planning out the president's daily brief. As I said, we would always say, okay, today, these are the articles we're going to do, or we're going to have to delay these because this crisis has come up, or we don't think these other articles are quite ready yet, and go back and forth on that. So that's an important job. That's one my wife had for a while and did very well at it. So it's there's a variety of things, and no one day is the same. So that's when you're in the field, it's a little different, of course, because you're out and about and you're meeting people and discussing issues. And I don't want to go into this in too great a detail, as you might imagine, but you're looking for people who might have access to the material that your government needs that nobody wants them to see. So you find ways to approach the people that might have access to that material. And but then you get into a very difficult assessment game as to, on the individual and the person. Do they really have that access? What's their motivation? Will they be able to work with us? And, what sort of ways that you can get that job done. And a lot of it is personality driven, I think, but also it's driven by requirements as to what the U.S. government needs to know and wants to know. So and that day is different. So I probably shouldn't say any more about that.
Well, in terms of all of this, you've got a lot of moving pieces and a lot of people who are collaborating on different areas of this and a lot of people that you're working with. So, with that in mind, are you in general working with a larger group of people, or is it more isolated and then you kind of bring your pieces to the table?
No, you're one of the things that they evaluate in your evaluations for projects. We used to joke it was the plays well in the sandbox with others, because it is a very collaborative process. And for instance, when a finished analysis goes out of the building, your name is not on it. It's the agency's product, so that's why they want to make sure it's well coordinated and it matches a certain quality and standards. So and being able to work with other people in a collaborative atmosphere is extremely important. And of course, you have pride of ownership when it's your analysis and it's your writing skills, but you can't get carried away with that, because you can't assume that you know everything and have access to all information. I used to tell people that being an analyst at the agency, and it's probably similar to being an operations officer, was that it's like you're trying to assemble a puzzle, but you don't have all the pieces, and you never will. So what you need to do is one way to fill in some of those gaps is by collaborating with others, and you make sure that you are taking the right approach to a particular issue or a project you're working on, so you don't get blindsided. One of the assessments of our work on the Iraqi WMD fiasco, as we call it, I think, was that we went into those. We collect all this material, but we went in with the wrong set of assumptions, and so that one of the changes that was introduced was that there was a process by which you had to test your assumptions, and that was happened, in a larger group with this discussion project. So you would, whiteboard or just discuss things and with each other and say, make sure that you weren't excluding possibilities that would, upset your particular line of analysis. And that was really necessary to make sure that you weren't leading yourself down a blind alley. And it's something we continue to teach in our analysis courses at the agency, and when we work with other groups as well. So it's that element is, and then that's one of the reasons I think why they say that, one of the best things about working there is the people, because you do develop a very strong esprit de corps in the building, and it comes from, I think, working so much with others.
That's fantastic. And I know just as we're talking, I'm seeing and hearing so many things that are a little bit off of what the entertainment industry would like us
Mhm.
to believe about working in the CIA. I feel like they portray it as being much more of an isolated thing and a lot less collaboration and very much that spy aspect to it and less the more analytical side of it. So that brings me to my next question. What, in your opinion, does the entertainment industry tend to get wrong?
Well, the first thing I can think of that they get wrong is the widespread use of cell phones. Uh, People carrying cell phones around in their offices. I mean, you're not even allowed to bring a cell phone in the building. You're supposed to turn it off as soon as you drive in the parking lot, and that always drives us crazy. All these They're having all these conversations on cell phones out in the open that I'm assuming are not encrypted, and it's just the cell phone is probably the best transmitter of your location, your thoughts. It can be manipulated as a vehicle. It's just incredible the way they do that. And I guess they do it because it's a way to engage the audience, since everybody uses cell phones all the time now, and smartphones and things. So, but that's the first thing that really strikes us. It's bothered me for the longest time, and so that's one thing they get wrong, terribly wrong. And others, I think you've got a good point in the sense that the way they promote the notion that these are, you're one against the crowd. Now, a lot of that is understandable, because in fiction, you propel your story through conflict and tension, and I think Americans have always had an attraction to, the lone hero figure, and it's understandable, and I try and it's something I can't ignore in the series that I write as well, with the Carl Byer, the protagonist in the Cold War spy series. Um, and the High Noon character. I mean, he will never, I think, escape that, and we don't need to. It's fine. But it can be taken to an extreme. There was one author who I read, Adam Hall, and I've read all his books, and they're a lot of fun, very entertaining. But he essentially has his officer, his spies are out working all alone. They're sent someplace alone, and they've got a control officer that goes out with them, and provides the support they get. And then, I mean, it's it's pure fantasy, and you see that a lot. And the other thing, I think, unfortunately, what it also promotes is this sense of um, uh, what's very common is the sense of betrayal, and people are Machiavellian and backstabbing without a second thought. Um, that's really pretty alien to, I think, to the world. I mean, you do have the bad apples. I mean, there's always going to be folks like that. But one of the things I think that I try and get across is that a lot of those folks out there, and this came up in a radio interview thankfully, I did a little while ago, that one of the things making Carl Byer out to be is he's just a regular Joe. And as most of them are. I mean, everybody has, there's plenty of soccer moms there. There's plenty of, I mean, I spent, I don't know how many times, how many hours on the Beltway taking my daughter to hockey practice, and how many weekends on, in up in New England and Canada and the Midwest at showcase weekends for hockey. And our first daughter was born at 24 weeks, extremely premature. My wife and I spent like the first 5 months of her life every day down at the ICU unit at Georgetown Hospital. And yet our careers proceeded. We didn't suffer for that at all. The agency makes a point of being what they call family friendly, and in our experience, that was certainly the case. And so these are they're not the sort of self-centered, vicious Supermen or superheroes that are often portrayed, in the novels. And I think now that doesn't mean they should never write that, if that's what, because those books, people are interested in. This is escape literature in a lot of ways, but I can't go that path. I just can't do that. Although I do take liberties, obviously, with the world in which Carl Barr operates. But I do try and discuss um, and he does face a lot of bureaucratic obstacles and whatnot, which is also unfortunately true. Um, the but He is just it's a regular guy. I had some friends of mine who are operations officers who uh, working now in the entertainment industry. They said they had talked about starting a series where you would take a regular person off the street and put them in a situation, say, okay, this is, we're doing an operation here and this is what you got to do. And then they would throw in a wrinkle, like have some stranger jump in the car or try and encourage it. How do you respond to this? And the point being, okay, this is the kind of thing that happens, and you got to handle. You're not a Superman. You're going to be heavily armed. You're probably not armed at all, and you just can't. Got to deal with it, and you got to get on and try and complete your mission. But you don't want to create a big disturbance because you don't want to draw attention to yourself. So it's about being a regular individual who has tremendous training and dedication and commitment. So I think, and a very strong support network. So I think that's one of the things I think that the industry tends to get wrong, and the cell phones, and all the gunplay. I mean, it's just. That's, if you want to draw attention to yourself, then run around firing a weapon. And the one series that we were watching on TV, the new director Ryan sees, he's when they was in Paris early on, to go after some terrorists. I got really upset when they were getting ready to leave, and the CIA assassin, of which there are none in real life, was he sort of holds up this, I don't know, it was a Glock or what the weapon was exactly, but he said, he says, okay, you think you can handle one of these? You want to use these? And he gives it to him. And I erupted, I said, that would never happen like that. I mean, the French officers were with him. The French are not going to want us to run around Paris with weapons and firing them. And it's not just, you don't just hand those things out, it's up to the chief of station who gets a weapon, and it's pretty hard. I mean, it's very rare. So I think that, and I just kind of erupted, like, that would never happen. That's not the way it happens. And my wife just says, relax, Bill, it's entertainment. Just relax. Will you just sit back and enjoy it? And which I find hard to do at times, I have to confess. So anyway, so those are some of the things I think that is the characters, the world in which they operate, and how much collaboration there is and support, and also the gun stuff. Yeah. And the cell phones. I can't emphasize that enough. The cell phones. Damn. Those cell phones.
Okay, authors, be on the note of those cell phones. Be very careful as you are writing your stories. But what we just discussed actually triggered some really interesting questions for me that I want to talk about a little bit more, because I feel like, again, the entertainment industry kind of has this one very particular view of what it's like to work with the CIA. And what we're getting today is a very different picture of that. I love that you are really focused on talking about how supportive and collaborative the entire industry is. And I know you've talked about how your own family has been a part of this as well. So, in general, as a very big generalization here, do you feel like a lot of people do have these strong family ties to everything that they're doing with their work? Do they have that big support system, or is it more of like one person and the rest are just supporting from afar?
No, I think it's very a lot of strong ties, and it's very present and obvious. I mean, on the one level, it's organizational, institutional. When I was in Iraq, I was just stunned at how extensive and the support network was for us, and in that environment. I tell people I ate more blackberries when I was in Iraq than I did my entire life up to that point. I mean, it was just so much. It was just, and and that's kind of a facetious example, but I think it was just so strong, and I was amazed numerous times at what they were able to put together. And I often tell people, to me, throughout my career, I was stunned. I was always focused on integration and cooperation between the what we call the director of intelligence, the analysts, and the director of operations, the case officers and reports officers and support officers there. But there were, and then I realized late in my career how little I knew about some of the other elements that make that place work so well, like the support folks, and and also the science and technology branch. I mean, I worked on one project where I had to I co-authored a report, what we call these lessons learned studies, where we look back on these projects to see and pull what lessons you can out of it. And in that particular one, I had to do a lot of interviews in the science and technology directorate. And I was stunned at the breadth and depth of expertise out there. I mean, I was just, and then I was, kicking myself. It was my bad that it took me that long to discover that and to realize that. It was, as I tell people, one of the guys I talked to had a PhD in antennaology, if that's even the right phrase for the discipline, and he wasn't the only one. But in some of the stuff we do, it's very important that you have people with that expertise. So the other thing was, so that's on a broad organizational level, but even just on a person-to-person level, in some ways, it was personality driven, and I always had a good network of friends and colleagues that I worked with, and but I don't think I was that rare. I wasn't rare. Maybe I think my personal experiences and work assignments allowed me to build a broader network than maybe others did. But we socialized a lot together after work. I played on a softball team, which those of who remember the old Get Smart show would be interested to know that we were named Chaos. And so there was just a lot of that went on. And you maintain those networks. I had just recently, I got some emails from a couple people that were in my career training class in 1981, our paths crossed now and then, but not that much. They were just sort of wondering what I had gotten up to and what had happened in my career. And they're living out in Utah and New Mexico. And we're going to try and get together somewhere, sometime, just to catch up on our lives, our careers, but our families as well. So you get that. So it is, I think, a broadly collaborative environment with a lot of support. And there are many times I just, would go around and say, how do I do this? For me right now, it's a lot of computer stuff. I say, well, gee, how do I turn this computer on? What do I do? What buttons do I push? And everybody kind of rolls their eyes and they help Bill out, old man Bill, and let him know what he needs, the IT stuff he needs to do his job that particular day, with no questions asked. And everybody's happy to chip in and help each other out. So I think that's pretty common.
I love that. Now, another thing that you mentioned is that you do have some level of flexibility. You were able to go to your kids' games and you were able to
Mhm,
do
mhm.
family things. So, when it comes to looking at the flexibility of the schedule, is it fairly flexible that you can take some time off? You can go do things with your families. It's not something that you necessarily have to withhold from living a life in order to then manage your job?
Yeah, no, that our experience was that we were able to have a very rich family life, and with friends and rich social life. That was never really an issue. The One of the things I remember well when our first daughter was at Georgetown, when I first was born, and I remember the office director. I think it was the Office of European Analysis. He came down to me and he said, you guys take whatever time you need to be at the hospital to support that. He says, we'll cover you here. Don't worry about it. And he was true to his word. I mean, it was shortly after that I got the assignment to go to Berlin in September of 1989. And when everything broke apart, we had just gotten off the plane. Next thing you know, I mean, there's the walls coming down and Germany's moving towards reunification. So I think, so in that respect, yeah, they did. I mean, there's a limit to that, of course. And of course you could, I would usually get out of town for Christmas or whatever to visit with family. But the thing is, you have to realize you're always going to be on call. I remember one Christmas vacation, I got a call and they said, you got to come back. We got to work for a request for the National Security Council. The White House wants to do something and they need our assessment of the possibilities and the alternatives and what go wrong. And so I said to my parents, I was at my sister's place in Cleveland. I said, sorry about that. I got to go. And you're on call 24/7. There's numerous times when you get called late at night. I remember when my wife was running the President's Daily Brief, oh gosh, she was lucky to get in bed before midnight, because we had a security facility installed in our basement. So she would get drafts sent to the house that she would have to, chop off on. And So it's, there is that chance. It's not the entirety of your life. I mean, you obviously have a family and a social life, but you have to realize that that can get disrupted, by the press of business, and you have to be prepared for that in your life.
And that's actually really interesting because I was just going to ask, with this type of work, I feel like a lot of it has to be done on location. So if you are on call, you would have to go in and deal with these things. But you just mentioned that your wife, with certain security measures, was able to do some of this at home. So do you feel like with the change in technology and the advancements that we've made, that some of this is now done, from your home? Can you do some of those things? Or is it always one of those security things where you have to kind of go in for it?
Maybe not always, but probably about 90-95% of the time, you have to go into the building. And it's, there were adjustments that have been made as technology has advanced, but there's always limits, and you're always got to be. I mean, security is often the number one thing you're thinking about. I mean, during the pandemic, I'm not aware of being able to us being set up to work from home. You would have to. They worked out alternate schedules for people to go in, and because that was the only way to do it. You got to go in. I mean, and it's not just the security element, but that it's because of the necessity of the collaborative process. You need to have other folks working together, and uh, it's really difficult for me to imagine how you would. I mean, you can have secure communications like Zoom communications and whatnot, and through various apps like Signal, but I'm not sure how secure those really are. And at the end of the day, I mean, I worked on a project that was not agency wide. It was a think tank or a consulting group here. After I retired, we used the Signal app, but uh, I don't think we'd be talking about some of the operational stuff or analytic projects that an outside app. So I doubt they would get that approval to do that. So yeah, you do have to go in.
That makes a lot of sense. So, with that in mind, I want to switch gears just a little bit and I want to talk about the equipment of the trade. I know we can't get too detailed into this, but what are some of the things that we should be noting as we're creating our stories that might be something that lends authenticity to the environment we're creating?
Yeah, I guess it depends the time frame that you give it, when you set your story. Like I say, when I first started in 1981, you know, we would wait for the operations center to print off all these paper cables and paper traffic, and you would get those and sort those through your desk. And I spent most of my career building my files in an old, file, paper file on a shelf above my desk. Now that's all different. You used to, you would write your first draft. You would take it to your branch chief, and he would bring it back to you with all the pen notations on it, and the red ink on it, and then you would make that fix and send it to the division chief and go through the same process and carry it up and give it to the front office and carry it up to the seventh floor where the editorial staffs were sitting. And you would, in each case, you would go up and read off with all the written changes on it. And then gradually, as the technology advanced, they would introduce things where you would print off extra copies, or then they had the what's the not the app, but there's the thing where you can edit online and it shows what you've changed, with the
Curve
marginal
the track
annotation. Yeah,
changes.
yeah. So
Yeah.
we started doing that, and somebody like me always was uncomfortable. Each technological change was a new challenge that I had to struggle to overcome. But and now it's just a much more driven in terms of the technology, and I think they try and keep pace uh, uh, with the technology and the computer technology. I mean, you have to. I mean, I spoke to my younger daughter's uh, class one time, and she was one of the masters she got at American University. And I remember one of the students there asked me near the end, so what do you think of the biggest challenges today, to face it? I said, well, for me, I think it's keeping pace with the technology, and I think that's something that we have to do. Uh, I said, and it's good that I'm retired because I'm not the person to be doing that. But which is the advantage I have in setting my stories in the Cold War, So it's but it's. Uh, people become, and it's generational. If you got a younger officer who's a millennial or something like Gen X, they're going to be much more attuned to the computer challenges and workings of the computers today, because and that's just critical. We can, and you can do a lot inside. We have you can have sort of Zoom meetings inside the building on our own secure network. But so that's a lot of what you do on the outside, you can do on the inside. You just have to make sure that you, in your writing, that you make sure that people are aware of the security steps that are a part of it secured. So, because people are always thinking about, it's just so easy to lose material that would undermine your working with sources and methods, or the analysis you're providing to the folks downtown. So it's that's really important. And I think even if you don't work in the building or haven't worked at the CIA, I think you can probably check with the sort of security that's provided on the outside world, and adapt it to your story. So for those kind of communications.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. And I really like that we've kind of discussed how you have to learn and grow as the technology changes. And so my next question would then parlay off of that. How often are you trained in these updated things? Do you have a lot of trainings once you're inside of your job? Do you go through things on a yearly basis or at all?
Well, there's a lot of training, and it's not always the IT stuff. I think for a lot of people don't need that much training on their computers, and you just get when they put in a new system. That's pretty that works pretty quickly and pretty smoothly, and you'll get, there's tutorials if you need them, and but in terms of the training more generally, there's a great deal of it, particularly on the analytics side of the house. And it can be, everybody goes through a sort of an introductory program early on. How do you be an analyst? What do you need to know as an analyst? And there's and that lasts, and the broader career training stuff lasts a couple of years. And I think the analytic training program when I was there was probably about, it was several months, maybe half a year, and they really go over that. And then you'll do interim assignments around the building to give you a broader experience into the business, which you need. You don't want to work in an ivory tower. I think that's very helpful. We've fallen into that trap in the past at times, and has not been of a benefit for us. But there are also, classes that you take on and sort of intelligence successes and failures. So you can look at things we've done in the past, and what did we do well, what did we get wrong, and why, and how do we change, how do we fix that? The Trying to think of some of the other courses. They'll offer courses in, obviously, language training. That's very extensive and taken very seriously. There's courses in how to they might offer something on sort of, somebody's new to the Russia desk on, Russian history and culture and stuff like that. It's more substantive material. So it doesn't stop. And when you become a manager, you get training in how are you best as a manager? How do you help your people to succeed? And what are the kind of things you should be looking for? And in fact, I ran that program for a little while, for about 6 months before they asked me to take on a different job. So I think, and it's extremely important, because years ago they would take somebody who had been a good analyst, and we used to say, you take a good analyst, they make them a bad manager, because they didn't provide the adequate training that they needed. Or you would take a good case officer and make him or her into a bad manager. So you need to. It's very important, I think, to do that. And there's and they give you those sorts of courses when you're first starting, introductory management courses, then mid-level, and then senior. So I think when I got my SIS, when I was promoted into the Senior Intelligence Service, they sent us off for a couple weeks for what we called a sort of social training course. But it was really, okay, now this is the kind of things this is the level you're working at, and these are the kind of things you need to focus on at that level, which was very helpful. Yeah. So there's, in fact, there's a whole division or office devoted to training and putting together these courses and having instructors. And it does not hurt your career to become an instructor in one of those courses. I used to say it was a refresher. I finally saw the things I had neglected, and now I could get back to them when I got back on the field. So.
I love that. And I know with certain professions, they do have mandated professional development that you have to have within a
Mhm.
certain time period. With this, is it something that you have to do within a certain time period, or is it something that just as these changes come up, you get to take these different courses and learn these different skills?
I think as you, it's as these changes come up in your career, when you're promoted into a certain level, or they might say, okay, if you want to become a mid-level manager, you should take that mid-level course to show that you're serious and you are prepared. And so but it's really tied to the progression in your career as to what you're eligible for and what's needed. So.
Okay, with that in mind, is that something you do in the course of your job work hours, or is that something you do in addition to that on your own time?
No, usually you that's part of your daily job. When you take this course, you leave your regular day job for a week or 2 week or however long this course takes, and you're devoted your full time into that particular training exercise. Language training is a little different. That's something you do in addition. You carve out an hour out of the day or whenever the instructors are available to go down and take that lesson. So that's different. So there are some courses where you do that, but for the most part, if you're going to do training in management or analysis or operations or lessons learned, you take that time off, those a week or two or perhaps longer, depending on the course.
A lot of what we've talked about today has touched on things like chain of command and different job titles. So, just give us a quick, brief overview of some of those titles that we might need to be aware of as we're creating our stories.
Oh, sure. It's well, there's been a change in the last couple of years as we've created what we call mission centers. You used to have the directorates would operate separately. I mean, there were cross currents as necessary, and much of that was driven by personality, as I say. Um, but now it was felt that we really need to have folks working together, and so they would combine primarily the operations and analytic directorates in particular mission centers, which are for the most part geographic. The one that I'm currently working with is Europe, Eurasia. And then you have, but up until that, a couple of years ago, the directorates operated separately, but everybody had what was divided into, branches, divisions, and then offices. So I think, well, I mean, I should correct that now that I think about it. The branch, division, and office was an analytic structure, and so you would have, let's see, might be the Central European branch, and you were part of the European division, which was part of the Office of Russian and European Analysis. And then after that, it gets up to what we call the seventh floor, where folks were operating more corporately, with a more corporate perspective and responsibilities. Um, in the DO there would be branches and divisions, and they would pretty much stop at the division level. So I think, and it was similar, I think, in the other directorates. But like I said earlier, I neglected getting to know some of those other directorates very well, so I can't say exactly how it goes. But I think it was similar. You start with something that's on branch level and then division level, and then somebody would have a sort of broader office-wide responsibility. Um, and it can be very hierarchical and very bureaucratic in that respect. You have to go up through the branch chief and then the division chief and whatnot. But of course, it makes sense because you don't want to skip the branch chief and go right to the division chief. I mean, it's that can create some morale issues and competence issues. People need to know what's going on at their various area of responsibility. So I think so that's pretty common. And I think in Carl Bayer, for instance, he's in Berlin Walls when he's working on the exfiltration of a KGB officer who he's come to know over the years. One of his biggest obstacles is the division chief, the European division chief, and he's in the director of operations. And he has to get around that. And I think, but because he is himself managing it, he's the deputy division chief at this point. He doesn't have to go through a branch chief. But if you were a case officer and you're in the field, first you got to go through the chief of station, then you got to deal with the branch and then the division. That's one reason why officers in the field often well, I won't say they hate, but they have reservations about headquarters. They used to refer to it as dead quarters or hindquarters, and they see it as a sort of obstructionist. But it also is pretty important support you get from the, the desk back in Washington. Um, so that's the basic structure there. But then, gosh, if you're writing say a PDB, you'll go up through your branch, division, office, and then it goes to a whole different level of review. I guess the perspective is much different on the seventh. So but I think the important thing for folks on the outside is to realize is that you're always dealing with that bureaucracy, that organization, and it's something to overcome. And you might try to find ways around it. You might be frustrated. You might be happy with it, the support you're getting, but to write as though these people are independent actors in the field under no other responsibility, particularly when they have people getting killed, when there's all these let's just bump this guy off, or let's shoot this guy, shoot that guy. That's pretty outrageous, frankly. The restrictions on lethal activity are extensive, and in fact, you have to have White House approval. So I think, and so to have that people getting bumped off just as a matter of business in the course of a day is kind of silly, frankly.
That makes a lot of sense. Now, on a very related note, what are some of those words, those buzzword type things that we need to be aware of that could lend authenticity to our stories? Are the things that we don't necessarily use in everyday conversation that might work really well in a story?
Uh, yeah, I'm trying to think. I'm so used to it. One is that people use acronyms. I mean, everybody in Washington uses acronyms, and each building, each department has their own language of acronyms. And even in the agency, they own each directorate. I mean, there are times when I remember one time, I think it was when I was in Iraq, and I was saying, SDR? I'm reading this SDR. What is that? They looked at me and said, "It's the surveillance detection route, man. Don't you know that?" And I said, "Well, no." So, and so they shouldn't be shy about having people speaking acronyms, but of course they have to introduce it in the full title early on so that the reader knows. So that's one thing they do is the acronyms. And then there are other things, talked about the shorthand for pseudonyms or pseudos, cryptonyms or crypts. I don't want to go into that anymore, so that gets to other issues. But gosh, trying to think other phrases. And again, it's the time you're writing about. It's one of the things I have to keep doing is thinking back on the Cold War. What was the language or the slang in the 1950s and 1960s? My publishers always have me check on that, and and the use of obscenities. I mean, it's much more frequent now. The F-bomb is just a matter of course nowadays, but back in the 50s and 60s, it was not. And so you have to be very careful about that kind of thing in terms of the language. But, that I think would be anybody who's doing their research be aware of that. So I guess I can't think of other terms or phrases that I can think of that come to mind that would lend authenticity to an outsider's account, of spy fiction. Sorry.
No, that's fine. We got a lot of really great things, and I think the acronyms are really important to be discussing as well because we wouldn't know.
Yeah.
The outsiders, we have no idea, but that's a really good point to be bringing up. And with that, is there anything else we need to talk about to make sure that we are writing really, really well written CIA anything into our story?
Sure. One of the things I discussed in another podcast was in terms of building the characters. I talked about the need for, you don't want to have people who are superhero badasses and always on the lone wolf and always on their own. Although it's understandable when people work that into fiction because I start out writing private eye fiction as well because when I was in grad school, I loved taking a break reading Raymond Chandler and Ross McDonald and whatnot. And there's something to that, the lone wolf out there who's, I think that's a characteristic of American detective fiction as well. And good for it. I mean, well done. I think, because I always admired, the Philip Marlowe and Lou Archer characters and the Sam Spade. But I think came across to me. And when I was in Berlin, the minister called me into his office, and he gave me a letter that somebody had written in. He says, this is old German here, and he's in the old Social Democratic Party, and he said he worked for us on and off, and he'd like to, continue a dialogue. He says, why don't you go talk to him and see what the story is with this guy? And I said, yeah, sure. So I took the guy to lunch, and just listening to him, it was fascinating. I mean, his experiences as in Germany and during the Nazi period, the Second World War, the years after the war, the rebuilding of Germany and its integration into the Western Alliance. And he told me about his experiences. He was from the East, and how he had to flee there, and his wife, and the times they spent in prison, the bouts in prison under the communist regime. And another old lady was walking by, and she heard us talking, and she was sharing her experiences. Oh, I was in Bautzen too, and I think I knew you. I was thinking to myself, these guys are like walking history here. Their experiences encapsulate so much of what happened in Central Europe in the 20th century. You don't need to create, superheroes and whatnot, or super villains. I mean, it's just these normal people and the experiences they had. You can portray that in your fiction and convey so much of what went on during that time. And I think that's one of the things I try and do with the characters in my stories. So I tell people, it's fiction, but the settings are real. These were real crises. When my publisher said, when I got to my current publisher, because I ditched the ones that were putting out my books on private eye fiction. And I found a senior editor at one of these writers' conferences. I sent her a manuscript of what is the first book in the Cold War spy series, Tears of Innocence. And they published it. But then I'd written the second one just because I wanted to sort of capture the collapse of the Habsburg Empire in the East, and that world that just disappeared, like in the Grand Budapest Hotel. And as I was walking down the terminal, my wife said, you better go to Vienna because it's been a while since you've been there. That's why the story is set. And I said, yeah, you're right. I'm certainly happy to spend a weekend in Vienna, even though it was January. It's pretty cold. I'm walking down the tunnel at Heathrow Airport. We were living in London at the time. And I got a mass emailing from our publisher saying, well, we're not doing any mysteries and thrillers anymore. Sorry. But here's a list of publishers that might be interested in taking on new writers, new authors. So I like the website of the current publisher I'm with, Coffeetown Press, and I sent them you always write an introductory letter and you send them like first 50 pages or so. And they said, we're intrigued by your writing and your characters. Can we see the rest of the manuscript? I sent it to them, and they said, came back to me and said, is your manuscript still available? I said, yeah. And they said, are you thinking of a series here? And I said, well, we could do a series. There's so many things going on in the Cold War in crises, that provide a good backdrop for, I think, espionage fiction. And they said, yeah, because, well, we'd like to offer you a contract, but we want to make it for more than one book. And I said, you got a series. And it was, and I found out it's so easy to find various events and crises that are going on and drop my protagonist right into the middle of it. And he doesn't have to be, the superhero, the supervillain, or the Machiavellian backstabber or whatnot, who's bumping people off all the time. It's more, he gets beat up a lot, unfortunately, but he recovers from that. He's a tough old nut. But I try and give him his wife, who he meets in Berlin in the first book, and this protagonist that he comes across from the KGB or the Stasi, or the Ukrainian hitman. I try to give them a history as well, and to make them more real, give them some depth, but also so that they sort of portray much of what all the various currents that were underway in Europe and the world at the time in the Cold War and the challenges that we all faced. So I think you can do that, and if you think about it long enough and make your characters real, they don't have to be James Bond, who really wasn't a real spy because he never collected any intelligence, never recruited anyone. So, but the movies are fun, and I liked watching, Sean Connery or Daniel Craig or whoever as James Bond, and made sure I saw all the movies. So, and we'll continue to do so, whoever they put in that character role. So, but I think that would be sort of my closing statement in the books, in terms of the things to look for and do to make it more credible espionage fiction.
I think those are very wise words. And because of that, we can get really good examples of this from your stories. We've heard a little bit about them. Give us the titles so we can look them up.
Sure. The first book in the series is Tears of Innocence, and it's set in Berlin in the immediate months or weeks right after the end of the Second World War. In fact, that story was sort of unique how it came about. I said to my wife, I want to write a book set in Berlin right after the war, because I'd been in Berlin frequently, and then we lived there for a couple of years, as I mentioned. And I said, I got an opening scene that I like, but I don't have a character or a story yet. And she says, well, why don't you use my father's story? He was in Berlin right after the war, working for military intelligence, part of Operation Paperclip, which was the program to identify German scientific talent and try and get it to make assessments of it, and also then to get some of those folks to come to the U.S. And he moved into a house of somebody who had the exact same name, same spelling and everything. Guy never came back, but I thought that might make for an interesting point of departure in the story, and so which I did. And then the second book, as I mentioned, is set in 1955 Vienna. It's on the eve of the signing of the State Treaty, which ended the occupation of Austria and returned full sovereignty to the country. As I mentioned, it's that whole world, the world of the Habsburg Empire as in Vienna, how that disappeared. I think it's always fascinated me, and I wanted to give that some elements of that in the story. And then he rolls right into the third book in the series, and that book's called The Habsburg Variation. And then from there, he rolls right into the third book, which is Budapest Escape. He's still in Vienna. He's running a high-level asset in the Hungarian government, Karl Bayer is. And then suddenly the Hungarian revolt breaks out, and then the Soviets invade. So he's got to get his asset out, and he's got to get into Budapest, into the thick of things, and try and bring this guy out. So, and then there's he jumps ahead to Berlin Walls, which is he's back in Berlin as the wall's going up. He's got to exfiltrate a KGB officer who appears in the earlier books. And initially, Berlin was an easy place to do that because it was an open city and you can move around openly and just sneak you out on a train to the west. But as he gets there, of course, the wall's going up. It happened a couple weeks or a week or two before he got there, and suddenly it's like, holy cow, now I got to deal with a whole different situation. And in the meantime, his wife's parents, who were living in East Germany, decide that, gee, now's the time for them to come out. He's like, oh, God, so I got to do that to her on that too. So he does. That's a challenge he faces. And but there's some questions that come up to the KGB officer's agenda. Is he what they call a dangle, a provocation? Somebody the Soviet side would slip out, and so they could feed false information and whatnot, and get a better idea how we worked. And so that's another issue on his plate that he's got to resolve. The fifth book in the series is not out yet. I just finished that one up with a publisher. That's going to be coming out in next May. It's called A Turkish Triangle. He's in Turkey during the Cuban Missile Crisis. I wanted to I'd spent a lot of time professionally working Turkish issues and doing analysis and spent a lot of time in Turkey. So I wanted to get that into one of my stories. And so that one is we've lost 3 Soviet assets were killed, and he's sent to Turkey to investigate, find out what's going on at Karl Bayer's. And at the same time, Turkey is playing a critical role in the Cuban Missile Crisis because we've recently installed Jupiter missiles in Italy and Turkey, and those will eventually be traded for the Soviet intermediate range missiles that were in Cuba. That was one of the things. That was one part of the deal, and of course the Turks aren't happy with that. So it's another challenge he has to address while he's there. So that's it. The 4 books: Tears of Innocence, The Habsburg Variation, Budapest Escape, Berlin Walls, and coming to a theater soon near you is A Turkish Triangle next spring. So those are the 4. And then I think discussions with my publisher. I think he's going to. Karl Bayer is not going to be able to dodge service in Vietnam anymore. It's 63, 64 when things are really starting to pick up. So it'd really be hard for me not to have him go and do his due diligence in Vietnam. So I think that's the next step in the adventures of Karl Bayer. So.
Very interesting. Oh, I'm excited to read these. Where can everyone connect with you online?
Well, there's my website, which is www.billrappsbooks.com. Bill Rapp's Books is all one word, no caps, just billrappsbooks.com. I also have a Facebook page under my true name, Bill Rapp, and that's where I initially set one up for Bill Rapp's books, but I think it reaches more people, and so I just deal directly with Bill Rapp's books, Facebook. I'm on LinkedIn as well under William Rapp. I don't do that much on LinkedIn, unfortunately, so it's probably better to go to the Facebook page or the website. And of course, the books are available through Amazon. I think where else? Your major distributors and bookstores, you can get them there. I do author events and signings at various bookstores. I've got I've got two coming up in July. One at Bethany Beach Bookstore, which is in Delaware on the beach, on the shore there. Lovely little town, great beach community. And then I also have for years have been going to the Mystery Loves Company bookstore in Oxford, Maryland, on the Eastern Shore. Great little community, great little bookstore, very supportive. I also do signings usually at Christmas time at the Learned Owl in Hudson, Ohio. And then there's a couple in the Chicago area. I've done most of them with bookstore Centuries and Sleuths, which has histories and mysteries. It's in River Forest. The Barbara Books, which is a small chain of bookstores in the Chicago area. I've done some signings there. And I grew up in the town of Naperville. It's where the Private Eye series is set. And that's in just out about 30 miles west of Chicago. There's a bookstore there, Anderson's Bookstore. They do a lot of signing and events, and I've done a couple events there as well. So I think, but of course, any bookstore you should be able to order them and get them, I think, and just order them. Or I like to push the independent bookstores but of course, Amazon is a very convenient method to get books as well.
If this has been helpful to you, make sure you hit that subscribe and notification bell so that you don't miss out on any of the other experts inside of this series. We've talked to swap breachers, detectives, we've talked to CSI, we have lawyers, we have scientists, and more. And if you have somebody you would like to see on the show, go ahead and let us know down below, or the topics you'd like us to cover to lend authenticity to the stories that you're writing. And make sure you head over to Bill's website so you can learn a little bit more about him. All the links will be dropped down below. We'll see you in the next episode as we continue to talk about experts for authors.